people overestimate what they can do in months and underestimate what they can do in like years. Like I think going from V8 to like V13 in 3 to 5 years sounds like totally realistic. But I do feel like that's probably like talked about less.
All right, Tim. We've got the one, the only, the infamous Peter Sott on the podcast. Actually, am I saying that correct? Is it Peter Sat or it's Peter Sott? Am I right there?
I mean, the story is it's a joke because it's one of my friends from college. That's not his full name, so I'm thinking about like, yeah, it could be like Sat. I think would be. It's not like it's like the first half of his name. So yeah.
Well, you can tell that since you've never actually said your theoretical name aloud. This is not Peter. This is not Pete. This is Andy Lamb. But your pseudonymous 8A account that I follow to see what you're up to because your Instagram is never updated.
Oh, you follow it now.
I do, of course. I followed the old one too. I guess there's 3 Peter Sotts. There's the old Peter Sott who got banned from 8A. There's the new Peter Sott who is also known as Andy Lamb, and then there's your buddy Peter Sat. But Andy, welcome to the podcast, man. So psyched to have you.
What's up, Andy?
Well, I thought it was fun to bring that up because I love this. I mean, you're kind of under the radar a bit. You don't really publicize your hard climbing, and I just thought it was funny when I first saw Peter Sott and I somehow stitched it together. And then, yeah, can we start off with how you got banned by 8A, or was it a soft ban, a shadow ban? Did Jens email you and say, who is this fake guy?
No, so he never actually. Maybe before he might have like messaged me on Facebook and asked if that was me on 8A. So yeah, the way it got like I don't know if it's technically like shadow banning or I don't know exactly what that term means, but
I mean, you can't log on to him anymore, right? Your account, you now have
on my first account,
accounts. Yeah, it's no longer available. I mean, I can still see it at least, so I can see your sends of all the V13s and below, which now your new account seems to be more focused on V13s and up.
Yeah, but yeah, the story is like, well, so in the old 8A, you could just in your comment you could like inject. Or if you put in HTML, it would be like interpreted by the browser, I guess. But like, so a normal site would like escape it, right? Like if you were typing on like Google Docs some HTML, it wouldn't just start like actually turning into the web page, right? But I guess 8A was the old version was so like janky or whatever that it would just actually kind of like treat it like its own code basically. So I think it was just this joke where like in the early internet, I feel like you'd see a bunch of like pop-ups from the browser and be kind of spammy. Like I don't feel like any site has done that in like 15 years, but it's still like a thing you could do. So basically I did one of those in a comment.
Do you remember what that comment said?
It was just a joke. Like it was like warning. It said like this climb is super soft or something. Like warning, this climb is soft. But it looks.
Do you remember which climb this was?
Yeah, I think it was Cat Ranch. Yeah, it's one of those boulders. It's in lower, and it's like it's only climbable in the early season because it's like it's actually in the lake, so you need the lake to be like frozen with a lot of snow there. So it's only climbable in like May through June or whatever, depending on the season, I guess. I think even some people thought it was real because someone sent me a story of someone posted like a recording on Instagram and we're like, I can't believe 8A is doing this or something. So people thought it was like real. But yeah, a little bit after that, I just like couldn't log in. Like I tried to log in and like the password's like saved by the browser or whatever, right? So I was like, I definitely have the right password. And then I tried like the email reset like you would normally if you like forgot a password, and it wouldn't send the email. I think, and then I like you can like submit like a help request or something on 8A, so I did that. And then I messaged him on Facebook because I think he might have messaged me before, so we had like some chat, and he just like he wouldn't respond to me. So
Wow, I feel like you're really like a ill-intentioned guy. So like, if you get banned from something like 8A, it's just like, what could you possibly have done wrong?
Yeah, I know. It's funny because I we've talked after. Like he's chatted me later and never mentioned it. So I don't know.
It's also surprising because Jens is always famous for his brave and humble downgrading. So I thought he would maybe see your new feature of warning people about extreme soft climbs, and maybe he would integrate that. And now that you were
That's so interesting.
kind of talking trash about his janky site, I'm worried you're going to get banned again, dude. If he listens to this, he might be like, possible. "Oh, it's that guy."
Dude, I know really not much about 8A. Like I was gonna ask actually, like, you know, especially for you, Andy, like, you know, you don't post that much on any real social media thing, but you do use 8A. And I remember even talking, you know, a long time ago about like 8A frequently, like, you know, you like 8A. Josh, you like 8A. Like, I'm just speaking for those climbers who maybe don't use 8A, and maybe I should, but like, yeah, what's the appeal for, I guess, for both of you guys, but just a logbook?
Yeah.
Do you do any other like logging?
I haven't been on it much recently, honestly. Yeah, I guess I haven't been logging it consistently, but I do think it's actually nice to be able to go back and see like it's like, oh, it's kind of cool. Like there's some like things I forget when I did them. And I was like, oh, like okay, it is kind of nice to have the log. Like I think most of the things I've done are on there now. So yeah, before it was always just kind of like funny, and it was cool to see like what people were up to. Like you can like follow people. I remember the name for who you were following were like it was like a funny word, like it wasn't follow. It was like somehow creepier than followers.
Stalkers.
It was like watchers or something. Like it like wasn't like a normal like followers term. But yeah, it's like just see what people are up to is cool.
Yeah, dude, I freaking love 8A. I think I used to love it more. To me, it's just this, you can only climb so much. And back in the day, there wasn't as much climbing media. And so I would just browse 8A and look at climbs I wanted to do and look at the comments. And it's fun to see people that, you know, maybe flash it or not flash it. And then you do flash and you go like, oh, like, what did Daniel Woods do on this thing? Like, oh, it took him like 3 sessions. And then you think like, oh man, I did it in 2. Yeah. Like, I'm so cool. That never happened. I remember we were so into it, dude, that when we would be setting, we would play a game that was the comment. You'd say the comment, and then you say, who said this on what problem? That was the joke that we would have.
Were you guys ever accurate?
Yeah, dude. There's some amazing quotes. Like, I like the one where Mark F.A. abattoir in Yosemite, and it's some kind of quote like, you know, upgraded to V13 retroactively or something, you know, really think it's this hard or something like that. And then the quote below it is Carlo Traversi saying, there are no V13s in Yosemite. It's just like, you know, like 6 days later or something, just like, no. It's just, I don't know, it's just that fun kind of like insider baseball. I'm glad you are no longer banned because I enjoy following you on 8A, Andy, not Pierre. And so I did mention that, you know, you're a little under the radar, but you do have many hard sends under your belt. You've done multiple V16s, a bunch of V15s, some V13 flashes, and the last time I competed with you at nationals, you even snagged a spot on the podium, number 3. And so that's one of the reasons why. Yeah. Hey, it's still impressive, dude. I got it is a long time ago, but that was an incredible day. Was that like 2014?
14.
Anyways, I thought it's worth mentioning. I just got to point out that, Andy, you are brother and sister. You and Katie Lamb and Andy Lamb are brother and sister. I thought it was important to bring that up because one of the things that I just noticed, I'm just looking back on your guys' climbing careers, is that you both have had this consistent progression. You know, back in 2014, yes, you placed 3rd at nationals, which is incredible. But I would say that when it comes to who you were as a climber, you know, 10 years later, you're quite a bit better as a climber. And, you know, both of you have always been good climbers, but to be honest, from my perspective, and maybe I'm just blind and that's why I'm here trying to learn more, neither of you stuck out as kind of like these young phenoms who are just going to end up being some of the strongest climbers in the country. And so I guess the question I wanted to start out asking is, How did it feel from your side? Like, do you feel like you had linear progression, or what do you attribute that consistent progression to over the years?
Yeah, it's interesting because so maybe like at a high level, I think when you like especially when you start climbing, obviously you can progress pretty fast, but after a certain point, like depending on the person, how talented you are, or whatever. But at a certain point, like I think the progression does kind of slow down to the point where it's almost like not perceptible, if that makes sense. Like in my mind, like I haven't I don't feel like I've been like consistently progressing necessarily. Like it's not like, oh, like day to day or even like week to week. I'm like, oh, I'm feeling way better today than last session. But then when you kind of ask that question, it's like looking back, it's like I guess I have in a way consistently progressed, but I think it's just been pretty slowly, if that makes sense.
So how do you stay motivated then? Or because you did say to me when we were last chatting, you made some comment along the lines of, I never thought I would progress this far. And it's really
Yeah, for
interesting to
sure.
me, because would you stumble ass backwards into climbing V16? Like, that doesn't make sense either.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe what I mean by that is like I think there was a while where I was kind of consistently climbing V13s, or maybe not even like I just wouldn't kind of during college and whatnot. Like I wouldn't even get outside that often, and when I did, like there weren't like a ton of hard boulders to try. I mean, I would go to Bishop a ton, so I'd try those. But even like, and I did like some of the 13s in Bishop. Like I think when I was in college, I think I did like Mandala Sit, Spectre, maybe a few others, and there were like 13s in. Well, you were talking earlier about Abattoir. I don't know if it's 13. Yeah, there were like
No
other
comment.
13s, and then like, yeah, I think like I took a few trips to Waco. But yeah, like I think there was a long period of time where I just wasn't, because of like circumstances, just wasn't actually trying things harder than that, if that makes sense. And then, so yeah, I mean, I guess like the reason I kind of wanted to move to Colorado was, and that was in like 2017 or 18 probably. I mean, I think part of the reason was just like, oh, I kind of wanted to try something harder and like see. I guess I kind of expected I'd be able to like climb like V14s. So I was like, I've done like a decent amount of 13s. And at that point, like when I moved there, I don't even know if I would have ever even tried a 14, like maybe like direct north technically. But I don't think I'd ever really seriously tried anything like harder than 13, if that makes sense.
It's a really interesting point too. Like,
Yeah.
I I was on the trip when you did Spectre. I
Yeah.
was on a trip with you for 2 weeks in Waco. I watched a lot of your like college climbing, and it's funny when I like wrote your name in a contact on my phone. I wrote it with like goat emojis, and I like didn't see that until recently. Like, and it's been like years since I've seen you and like hung out with you and climbed with you. But back then, I really did view you as like uh, when I thought of technical and like execution in climbing, which is really important, vital terms when we're talking about high level climbing. You're a person that pops up in memory a lot. And local comps, a lot of local comps that we've had in the Bay Area, just gym sessions. Like we would have a lot of gym sessions that I remember were like maybe not as significant as outdoor sends, but to me they were, like I'm just watching hard climbing, whether it's indoors or outdoors or in a comp. And Spectre for me was like a really specific one. I kind of want to just bring up that story, and maybe that'll like kind of help with this little
I
topic,
was
because I
thinking
do think it's
about that
interesting.
actually.
Yeah, dude. I think it's really interesting. The story is awesome. I think it's really interesting you're bringing up, like, yeah, you spent so much time just like executing on, maybe more medium and climbing for yourself, but maybe just never tried like super hard stuff at that time. And it seemed like that. Like we would go to an area and we'd have a group of us, trying climbs and stuff, and Andy would be the sender. It felt like Andy would just be like the one who was going to send. Specifically when we went to Spectre, I don't know if you remember the details of this trip before the actual day that you sent Spectre. I don't
Yeah, I
remember
think
like how
so.
long we went for or anything, But I remember the Spectre itself, we were there for a couple of hours and we had to leave that day is what I remember. And we all kind of like knew that we were heading out of town, like after that session. And Andy was just looking pretty good on it. At a certain point, you took your shoe off and you were just like, you're gonna stick this move for sure, the Spectre Crux move. And towards the end of the session, Andy ends up sticking the Crux move, like for the first time, holds the swing, tops out, goes for the traverse on the top out, breaks a foot. Like after the hardest part of all of the climbing and like all the top out, breaks a foot off. I've never seen like a foot break off on Spectre or anything, and he falls. And he's done. And I was like, oh my God, like I have never seen somebody like break a foot and on a top out this hard. Like I'd never even witnessed like hard climbing, really get down that hard or like get sent that hard. And Spectre for me was always like such a magical hard problem. Like it always seemed impossible. And I remember like Andy being like just super frustrated. He was like, oh my God, like fuck. And we were like, oh my God, dude, like that sucks so bad. Like we gotta go. He was like, dude, give me like 15 minutes. Literally, the guy takes his shoes off, walks away, and just like hangs out for like 15 minutes. Next try, just sends the entire thing. And I was like, how do you even do that next try? Like, how do you even, first of all, how do you get that out of your head? And second of all, like, how do you send something like Spectre just like basically twice back to back, like no fumble try, like no fumble try. That's what I always kind of viewed Andy as, is like no fumble tries. If he's sending, he's sending. And like, I guess that was like significant. And yeah, is that pretty accurate to memory for you?
Yeah, no, that's how I remember it. Because yeah, I think we were just there for a weekend probably. But no, yeah, definitely. Like I remember breaking it. I guess it was like, in hindsight, it seems like it should have been scarier than it was. But I think because the landing like slopes up, I didn't actually fall that far. And yeah, I wasn't wearing a shoe because back in the day, I feel like that was like the beta. Now I feel like a lot of people heel. Like I think if I tried it now, I would definitely heel hook. But yeah, I remember back in the day, it was like, unless you had, like, I feel like the green teams were like really good at fitting in there, but unless you had those, it was like really hard to wear a shoe and put your toe in that start jug. So yeah, I was like, started trying it with my shoe off. I think I taped up my toe because it started like bleeding or something. Like my big toe
It
was
just
bleeding.
it just became so tactical.
I think back in the day that, like, I remember watching like the old videos of it. I think people like aren't wearing shoes usually, or like at
Just
least like
Dave. Yeah, pretty much just Dave.
I think there's
Did
another one.
Ethan
Like I feel like there are a
did
few where
Ethan
people aren't wearing
pioneer
shoes.
did Ethan pioneer
I think Ethan
the shoeless?
pioneered the
Dude, I tried it
shoeless. Yeah.
shoeless. I thought I was gonna pop a pulley in my toe. Like no joke. I was like, this seems dangerous. Like I don't know. Maybe my toe just isn't that strong. But I'm curious about you said something about moving to Colorado to get on harder climbs and to get exposed to that. And so I knew you from the Bay Area, and I would do the same thing where I'd kind of cruise out to Bishop, and I wasn't a big projector because it's like, how many weekends can you get out and project? So you would just climb what was available. And that really resonates with me, where I I still to this day haven't really gotten on things that are much harder than 13. And what made me wonder is, when you started doing that, what did you find was the difference between V13 and say 14 or 15? And I'm really curious, because an experience that I had was where I feel like as I started climbing in that grade range, or like the V13 below, climbs just kind of seemed hard, and it wasn't always clear to me that the grade was going to reflect my success on it, where sometimes a 13 would feel easier than an 11 to me. And so I'm just curious what your experience was when you moved to Colorado and actually started putting effort into the 14s and 15s and 16s.
So yeah, like that's sorry, I'm thinking about like the very start of again when I said that I went further than I ever thought. Yeah, like I think when I moved there, I was kind of like, oh, it's like my chance to climb like V14 basically. Because I feel like even it's funny, I feel like in the past, even like 3 to 5 years, I feel like the standards have just risen a lot. Where like I feel like even 5 years ago, like V15 was like really hard. Do you guys know Minko? This was like getting a little bit off topic, but I think once he said like He said, "Oh, like V16 is like the new pro grade. Like V15 is for like recreational climbers now," which I think is like it's kind of funny and true.
Shit.
But I feel like even like 5 years ago, it was like V15 was like not obtainable, or like in my mind, it was like, oh, that's like crazy hard. But I was like, well, I feel like I've climbed a bunch of 13s. I could probably like do some 14s. So it'd be cool to just like have exposure to that. Maybe the first one I tried was Memory is Parallax. I don't know if you guys know that.
Yeah, yeah.
Dude,
And
that one
it's
looks
like some,
really cool. That one looks
Kind
yeah,
of
really,
it's
kind
really
of
cool.
weird, kind of funky, right?
Yeah, like it. I think because like maybe Tristan was trying it, and I was like, I don't know. I was just like psyched to check it out, like see what it's about. And in hindsight, I think that's one that like did fit me really well because it's kind of crimpy, techy.
I looked at your 8A just now, and I at least one of your Peterson profiles, which I think is the only one with V14 on it, and your first one was Warrior Up in the August of 2019, which actually used to get V15, which actually I think
Yeah,
some people even claim it now V13, but just
yeah. I
kind of,
think like Ethan said it was super easy for him.
yeah, he
um,
crushed it.
and yeah, then it's funny. Like Warrior Up, I think I also did pretty fast actually. Like maybe in a day, or maybe I had like tried it. Like I might have like kind of had like a mini session on it once, and then just ended up trying it. Like yeah, August, and I mean it's kind of like a one mover. So
yeah.
it's like if you do that move, you're doing it. So yeah, in a funny way, it wasn't like, and I guess that was like my first 14. Now apparently debated, but yeah, in a funny way, it wasn't like, it was kind of like not anticlimactic. Like I was psyched, but it was like wow, like that. It's funny that I just randomly tried it one day, and then like it wasn't really built up in my, it wasn't in my mind like one I wasn't like, oh, that's definitely my style, like I'm gonna like try it a ton or work it a ton. It just kind of happened one day.
So a little note on Ethan. It's Ethan Salvo, who, yeah, I just looked
Yeah,
on 8A, said he did in 10 tries, and he's just up there crushing in Squamish, which I know you're now climbing at quite a bit. And when I look at that, you tick off a V14, and then you start marching forward with these really classic V14s. There's a lot of really cool stuff on your 8A of not
mm-hmm.
just one movers. And when we were chatting before, something that you said is that you have gotten stronger in the gym over these past 5 years, and your strength metrics have gone up. Although you kind of pointed out that your quote unquote strength metrics are just adequate for your grade. You're not like some superstar,
Yeah,
doing one arm pull ups with, while holding someone or something like that.
yeah.
And I guess what I'm trying to tease out that I think is interesting is, it's, is it that you get stronger and then your grades go up, or is it that you started being exposed to these grades and then your strength went up, or was it just a natural, progression where, of course, if you did anything for these last 5 years, you would get consistently better. But the reason why I don't like that answer is because of how many people plateau, and you're I mean, people seem to plateau at all sorts of grades, whether that's V4 or
Yeah,
V14. And I just find it interesting that over this past, 5 years or 7 years or 8 years, there's just kind of this incremental showing up. So I guess, yeah, I'm going to go back to that first thing I said, and that I guess it's a question. It's, you've gained strength in these past 5 years in the gym and on your metrics, and you've gained grades outside. And which is it, chicken and egg? What begat what?
yeah. That's interesting for sure. Kind of trying to think like, so I think like maybe part of what I'd start with is like, I think when I was climbing V13s, like I think I did have, I guess I'd call it like adequate strength to climb like 14s and even like some 15s. I just wasn't really trying them. Because yeah, like I think when I was climbing V13, like I guess I always have had pretty naturally strong fingers. I think from kind of like the style I grew up climbing. So I think I like had the finger strength to climb harder than V13. And I guess like, or I think I had like the physical qualities, I guess, to climb harder than V13. I just obviously wasn't trying them. But I do think there was also like I do think there was some kind of like tactical, or maybe like tactical isn't even the right word, but it's almost like I needed to get used to like what climbing harder than V13 felt like. Like I think that kind of took a little while.
What does it feel like?
Like for
Seriously.
on memory, like kind of something that like talking about again, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but talking about it again, like when I first tried it, I was like, whoa, these footholds are like really bad. And I mean, it's like it's like slightly more than vert, but it's almost like face climbing in a way. It sounds a little funny, but it's like I feel like I'm not used to like putting this much pressure on my feet. And even like I think I messed around with a couple different shoes. So it was kind of like just getting used to moves that were not comfortable for me, if that makes sense. And like the false grip thing I talked about before, I was like, oh, this is like a weird move. Like it took me like a little while to just be comfortable with like I do think like in the harder grades especially, it's usually not like the moves are. I mean, I guess there are obviously climbs that are like pure straightforward like finger strength or power, like a V15 outside. Maybe it's just there are some that are just like, oh, it's like a really hard moonboard climb. But I think a lot of times it's like it's more like the moves are just a little bit weird and you need to get better at like learning that in a way.
Dude, can I just like
I don't know. I'm
oh
kind of
my god,
just
this
thinking
is
out
so
loud here.
good.
Yeah.
No, this is really good. I feel like this is really interesting that like yeah, I feel like you're like not really struggling, but like yeah, you're kind of struggling with this answer because it's super complex. I do think a really interesting part that you're kind of bringing up constantly is like I just needed to try harder things. And like that's a really specific, I need to be more exposed. I need to be more like uncomfortable and also just realize that maybe it was just hard because of the discomfort and like my unwillingness to like or my lack of exposure to those kind of new things. Basically what you're saying is you need to teach yourself more. And it's funny because a lot of climbers before I think a lot of climbers just like inhibit that part of their learning process basically by making the excuse that they're not strong enough to be able to solve these things because it probably feels like you're fucking not, like I think for a lot of people it probably does feel like you're not strong enough to like solve or find anything, but that's the point. I think the thing I brought up about Spectre and like just growing up watching you climb was like you always solve things not just quicker but better than everybody else around us. Like you were much more confident about the beta that you were finding. You're much more just like, I don't know, the way that you looked at the wall before or after a fall was always just for longer, and you would always just analyze longer. And I think that's a lot more significant than we think. And so
Yeah.
obviously by the time you got to 14, 15, 16, you were probably just going to do them because I do agree. I think your fingers were really, really strong, but I would argue that there are climbers that are a lot stronger than you, and myself is included. I feel like there are a lot of really, really strong people out there, and that's always going to be an interesting thing in climbing for me, like how many strong people there are, but then climbers like yourself who are like, well, I think I'm strong enough. Let's just go and try. And like, oh, those footholds are really bad. They're in like weird spots, and they're not going to move. But there's an ability to create. There's an ability to do this, and I guess like that was really interesting to me.
What really makes me want to ask is I totally understand that getting almost comfortable with the discomfort. I always think it's interesting. I
Yeah.
think people often will see strong climbers climb a V8 and they just will lock off everything and make it look really easy. And they think, oh, that's what it has to be for me. But there has to be sometimes when you're pushing your limits, you have to, things don't always feel there's awkward movements, and maybe when you are unbelievably good you can make awkward movements not awkward, but you do have to push into something new. And what makes me
Yeah.
want to know is now when you encounter a climb, do you have, if you encountered something like memory is parallax, what do you think when you see the feet, or when you get a kind of a weird false grip or a gasto cling? How does your thought process go nowadays?
Yeah, kind of even circling back on something like weird, like similar, kind of rephrasing what I said before. Like I do feel like usually when grades get harder, it's not like you just took the easier grade and made like the hold slightly worse or the moves further apart. Like it's not like a V13 is like a V8 with the holds half the size or whatever, right? like usually I feel like usually the movements are like just like weirder or different in some ways. Like even so we were talking about Sleepwalker before, and it's obviously like requires power and like hand strength. But I feel like when I first got on it, and hopefully this is circling back to Josh's question, like I feel like when I first got on, I was like, oh, it just feels like weird. Like at least for me, like being in the undercling positions is like uncomfortable because it's kind of like you're like really loaded up on the underclings and it's kind of like a body
Yeah, the feet are
position to
high.
move. I'm just like,
Mhm.
yeah, like I'm just like not used to. Like
Yeah.
I've never like climbed on a move like that in the gym. I even like I've kind of tried to like set a replica in the gym or something once, and like it's hard to because it's just kind of weird. And so yeah, how do I go about it now? Like I don't know if I have a strict process necessarily. Like I think even just kind of going into it with like an open mind, and even maybe before like I would kind of like general like mental aspect of mental like mindset, I would be thinking about like, oh, like I would be like thinking about the result. Like I'd be like thinking about how I want to send it or whatever. And like how I would be thinking about like how hard is this going to feel? Like will I be able to do it? Kind of like results. And I think something that like I have gotten better with is just being a little bit more like curious about how it'll feel, and then kind of like figuring out how to work with that. So that's not
Dude,
really, yeah,
it's
like
so
I
good.
don't really have a mental
No, that's
process to
really
be honest.
That's
that's
interesting,
really good
actually.
insight. Like
Yeah.
that is such good insight because that's exactly what I coach a lot of climbers to do. You know, like go climb easier things and be more curious, like be more open-minded. You know, find the complexity in this other grade and ask the questions about the climb instead of like telling the climb how you're supposed to do it. You know, you're giving a lot of like really high level insight that seemingly is straightforward to you. It's like an obvious process, you know, but that's a totally like if you watch 99% of other climbers, that's what they do. You know, like a lot of climbers don't really do that. And I think it's just like cool to see how obvious it comes. You know, it's like, you should climb it that way. And
Yeah.
I guess I
And
can
even
relate with a similar insight.
like one thing I was thinking about on sleep. So this is like more kind of like actionable thing on Sleepwalker. Like when I first pulled onto those underclings, it felt like I was saying, it just felt like really like uncomfortable and weird. And I was like, oh, and even like I don't really feel like I can like move out of these because I'm just so loaded up. And it's just like, yeah, it just feels weird. And then I think like you kind of we were even talking about this before, like trying different, like slightly different microbetas. Like, oh, does it for me it helps a lot if I like open my hip on one of the moves maybe, and like really like think about like sinking onto the foot and like opening the hip more, and like, oh, like okay, once I do that, like this move starts to flow a little better. Like that's like how it should feel. Or like on one of the moves, like maybe it's easier if you like turn in. So I think just kind of like experimenting with like one, I think just trying the move more, like your body will just kind of like naturally you'll like learn it, you'll get comfortable with it. Like any like thing you try for the first time, like it will feel weird and then it'll eventually feel natural. But kind of being like open and like aware of what of little tweaks you could make too, I think is useful.
That's really cool. And when I heard you say that it felt awkward, but then you kind of just kept an open mind, and that in some ways what hard climbing is oftentimes it's kind of awkward rather than just this almost mathematical, well, if you just made these holds 2 millimeters smaller, then it'll be this grade. And Tim, it actually made me think of what you talk about with bouldering competitions and these kind of weird coordination movements where if you look at them, maybe they just look easy, but then the setters will tweak the foot to face just a little the wrong way. You just feel a little bit awkward when you have to generate. And I just thought that was a cool parallel. But I do want to hear about that, Tim, but I just want to pick one layer deeper on what you're saying, Andy. And you're saying, okay, I come into these moves and they feel awkward. They don't feel comfortable. You know, it's not just like, oh, I need to pull harder to get to that move. It's more about sussing out how to make it feel a little more comfortable. And you mentioned on Sleepwalker, which me and Tim and Andy were just talking about a bunch because can we say, yeah, because Xander just sent it. We were psyched for him. Good job, dude. Sorry, I got lost my trail. So what I guess I want to ask is you've encountered that situation a bunch, right? You've gone to these hard climbs and you've had this kind of awkward feeling. And you mentioned on Sleepwalker, you said something around, oh, opening my hip. And I guess if someone were to walk up to their project and all of a sudden they pull on, they think, wow, this is way weird. This is not what I expected. like, how do you think you go about choosing what microbeta to do first? Like, there's a litany of things you
Hmm.
could do. You could say, move your hand over. You could say crimp versus open hand, or this foot or that foot. And just, do you have any thoughts as to how to start tackling that microbeta to find that lowest hanging fruit that may make the biggest difference?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I like that question.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously like or there's no like manual, or there's no there's no manual for that, obviously. Like, it depends on
But if you wrote it, I would buy it.
yeah.
if you figure
Every
it out,
person's
please
body
tell
is
me. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So like, this is it's like kind of a cop out answer, but I do think that's something that like just it's like, oh, there's no like substitute for experience at some point. I mean, I think like just climbing on a lot of different climbs on a lot of different rock types and with a lot of different people too is useful, because I mean, like, you'll obviously, everyone kind of has like a different style, different like body dimensions, different strengths, whatever. So I think you'll kind of always like, yeah, just climbing with a lot of different people will help you. And yeah, like, I think it's like over time with experience, you will learn your body, and you'll kind of like, you obviously know, like, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses. I generally like because of my body type, I like, I don't know, like lower footholds. For me, for example, I do feel like that's something I've kind of consistently noticed is like, I d- I'm not super tall, like I'm 5'10", but then my arms are pretty long, like they're like six. Well, I don't know if the measurement at the gym is accurate, but it said it was 6'2", and it's pretty good. Like, I'll keep that. But basically, I
Plus
do feel
four.
like
Okay.
I feel like I usually like climb pretty like tall, if that makes sense. Like, I feel way more comfortable being like extended than like, usually I'm not good at like really bunched up moves. And that's obviously like something that I could get better at, but I think over time, as I've learned, like, oh, usually like the lower foot option is better for me. Yeah, like, it's funny, we were talking about Ethan, and I've noticed I almost like never use the same beta or like I never want to use like the same micro beta as him, because I think he likes to climb like pretty bunched up. So that's the one thing I'm like, oh, usually the beta he's using, like, I probably shouldn't use.
Dude, I've noticed that a lot. Like the more I've climbed
Yeah.
with like stronger climbers, like literally it's been that the entire progression for the last couple of years. The stronger and stronger I get and the stronger climbers that I climb way less often with the beta that I see. But it's just as successful. It tends to be like more often successful with a wider variety of beta. It's so interesting. Like specifically I was trying Grand Illusion with like Nate Williams and Manny Quintana, and like Manny's like 5'4", Nate's like the same size as me, but we have like opposite styles of climbing, and we're all doing
Yeah,
like
for sure.
different feet. And it's like, dude, it's the same
Yeah.
climbs, the same. It's a high level difficulty.
Oh yeah, like for like Ethan and I were climbing on this project last night, actually. And I think like, I mean, like, we use like generally the same sequence, but there were a lot of like micro differences. There was one of the hard moves, he gets like this really high right foot and basically like ends up kind of drop kneeing. And like, I mean, obviously the details are hard to describe, but I like tried that. I was like, oh, it just feels like weird. Like, it feels kind of like bunchy to me, and like I'm too like loaded up on my arms, and it's and then I tried just not using the high right foot, instead kind of just flagging and having my feet lower. I was like, oh, that's like way better. And I feel like there are a lot of like I've noticed those patterns now. So
Yeah, this insight that you're kind of saying before, where you're answering Josh's question exactly with it's experience. You know, experience really is the common thread when it comes to solving first and like picking the little micro sequences. But personally, I think my opinion there is that it's contingent on the things you said just before that, which is being curious, being open minded, and like being willing to look for other options. Not necessarily going to excuses first, but like answering the questions directly. Even what you're saying with like Ethan's beta choices. It's like, oh, this drop knee, like, I don't know, it just feels like X, Y, and Z. It's not excuses like, oh, I'm not strong enough to do that. That's not, that doesn't feel good for me. Like, well, it doesn't
yeah,
feel good for you, but again, directed towards proactive kind of choices, I guess.
I think this is an important question that I'm going to ask because I, I want people to be able to put this into their practice. And something that I'm always conflicted on is, so we all have a style. And like you're saying, you have this experience and hey, like the low feet. I get that. I climb tall as well. And how do you know when to not lean too, how do you know when you're kind of pigeonholing yourself and doing too much in your style versus saying like, no, but this is the way I'm going to send the hard boulders. And I don't want to answer the question for you, but something that I'm wondering is when someone's at the level that, you guys are at, is it that, you understand all the different betas that are available and you're sending at your limit, so you need to lean into that style that works for you, versus like if we were to when we did climb together, Andy, we have very different styles actually. And why should I not chase your style or you chase mine or learn from it? I'm not phrasing this correct, but hopefully you see like, when do you lean into your strengths versus kind of saying like, hey, maybe this guy I'm climbing with who's doing it differently, maybe he knows something I don't. And even though it doesn't feel great, maybe that's a key that I'm missing something, or that is good beta for me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I think when I was describing my style, it was kind of in like micro terms, if that makes sense. I was like, oh, I notice I usually don't like to climb like as locked off as other people. And I think that like maybe that's because I'm just weak in that position. I do think I have like, I think with longer arms, it kind of is logical that like it just wouldn't feel as good locking off. So where I'm going with this, like kind of a tangent, but I do think like overall, I think I can climb in a pretty big like range of styles. Like I think, and that's something I think I've like kind of strive for, is like I definitely never wanted to be like, oh, I'm like the crimp specialist or whatever, like I'm the compression specialist. I think just climbing on like a diversity of problems, like a diversity of areas and rock types is good. So I think like I think not pigeonholing yourself into saying, oh, like I climb the compression ones, or I climb the crimps, or like I can't do the crimp ones, or I can only do big moves or whatever. Like I think I'm pretty open to like climbing anything that seems cool to me. If I like, I think if there was something that I really want to do, but I was like, oh, it's a style I'm bad at, I think I would be open to like to trying it and seeing like what I would need to change about myself to be able to do that, if that makes sense.
That's a unique internal headspace to have, right? If you look around at any other pro climber, they're the exact opposite of that. Well, a lot of pro climbers traditionally, or professionals in a lot of things, kind of
I think
are.
it depends, yeah.
Well, this is yeah. I mean, this is my opinion that I think a lot of pro climbers that I see are like really hammering the one thing that they are good at. That's an oversimplification, I know, but that is a unique internal headspace to have, where you're like, well, this climb for sure, I probably will learn a better way to do this type of thing just by trying it and just by figuring and just by asking those questions. And like, again, you're bringing up that word logical, and like logic is extremely important in climbing, to assess yourself and like see what strengths you have and what you don't have, and then try that. But I think also another approach works, is my point. Another approach does work, where you just kind of beat your head at something until you like really really unlock it and like get good at it.
Yeah.
Maybe not even asking those questions, you probably will do that. And I think that's not necessarily the thing that Josh and I are interested in, because like it seems a little bit more straightforward. It seems a little bit more straightforward to like bash your head at something until you're really really good at it. But it's clear that that's not necessarily your approach, but it's clear that you provide the same level of success that other climbers can get to, I guess, is a thing that I just find interesting.
I think the nuance that I think is important to tease out there, and one of the reasons why I brought it up, is that it's always a balance between bringing up your weaknesses, understanding all the potential, and then all the different potential ways to do something, while also knowing when to lean into your strengths. Because in general, you're probably not going to break into a new grade in the style you're worst at. And the way I also think about that is the world's first V16 is probably going to be done by someone who is extra good at whatever that problem typifies, and that's okay. And so that's why I like, it's kind of like talking to you, where it's like, okay, are you now at a level where you need to lean into your strengths, or do you ever take a step back? And I don't know, that was a fun rabbit hole of that. Go ahead.
Yeah, like one way I kind of rephrase it is like, I think on a given climb, it's not like, or especially if it's hard for me, like if it's not just kind of training, or if it's something I'm like, that's hard for me to get done, I think I would lean into like what I perceive as my strengths on that climb. Like for example, like I think I'm usually way stronger full crimping. So it's not like if there's a climb that's hard for me, I'll be like, oh, I should probably like half crimp this because I'm not good at it. Like if I feel stronger full crimping, and I would definitely full crimp it. But I think that kind of the flip side is I do think like I'm open to trying like all sorts of styles of climbing. Like if the even I don't know, probably like the thing I'd be worst at is like dynos maybe. But if there was like a dyno I really wanted to do, I don't know, there's aren't that many dynos near me outside at least. But like if there was one I really wanted to do, I think I'd be like open to like figuring out how to get better at that. And I think that would be good because I'd obviously learn through that process, you know.
Well, on that note, then I'm curious. I want to talk to you a little bit about the difference between climbing on a kilter board and climbing outside. And the reason,
Yeah.
the context of this is we were talking about a session you were having with Max Zolotukin, friend of the pod, friend of all of ours, who's been obsessed with the kilter board and just crushing it on there too. And I was also talking to him about his projects, and he was talking about, or I actually was the one who said, oh, isn't Penrose Step really cool? It's this amazing V14 in Leavenworth that it's just beautiful. It's got to be one of the cooler looking hard problems I've ever seen. And Max struggles with the Penrose Step. And when we were talking about this, you said, oh, what he's doing on the Kilter board is way harder than Penrose Step. And then Max in my email, when I brought that up, was like, he literally was saying, like, why am I better than Andy on the Kilter board, but he climbs 3 grades harder than me outside? What am I doing wrong? And the thing that is interesting there is it's these different styles. And what I think is also important for context is that Max is not just a board lord. Max has been climbing outdoors for decades, and I actually my hunch is he's climbed more double digit boulders than you have actually outside, just because Max is pretty freaking prolific when it comes to. I like that look. You're like, has he? Anyways,
No,
I guess
I'm definitely.
I guess what I really want to ask is, what's the difference between climbing on a kilter board and climbing outside? And maybe what does this say about you as a climber? And maybe what does this say about Max?
Yeah.
Sorry,
The
Max.
funny thing is like, well, I guess I feel like each of the boards, whether it's like the standardized boards or even like a given spray wall, I think just does have its own style. And it's obviously going to be like a little bit different than outdoor climbing. The funny thing is, I think maybe since that call, like I have been feeling pretty good on the kilter. Like it's almost like I like learned the style. Like I did I think the past 2 sessions. Now I'm just spraying about my kilter, but I think like
Spray on,
like
dude.
2 sessions ago I did like a 13 and 2 12s, and then last session I had like 4 12s, and it was I think in a way like I've like, so I feel like I'm like learning the kilter style, and I'm like getting better at it.
Wait, before we go on to the
I'm interested
board,
if that'll like transfer.
Yeah, I'm really curious too, but this reminds me about the last time I was climbing with you a bit, and we were in Colorado on the tension training center, and this was kind of right as you were probably moving there and leveling up into, because I think it was 2019, right around when you did your first V14. And I remember climbing with you, and I'm pretty good on a spray wall. And what I remember is that I was like, oh man, I did this move and it wasn't so tough for me. And then you didn't do the move. And then I couldn't complete the problem for whatever reason. And I just remember coming back the next week, and then you would do the problem. And the reason why I bring it up is it was really fascinating to me. I was just like, damn, like Andy just kind of gets shit done. Like you did not, I felt like I was able to bust out with some kind of power and just make that move happen. But then I couldn't necessarily put the whole problem together. And it just fascinated me that next week you then could do that move and could do it on command. And it's clear to me that you didn't all of a sudden get 50% stronger in a week or something. And so it's this interesting thing that does seem like you're able to ingest these styles and find your own unique way through that. And so that really reminded me of that. So yeah, I don't know. That's not a good question. There's no question there.
No, yeah, I'm thinking more about the original question. I think like, so one of the main differences between like, I guess boards, like the standardized boards and just even like the tension center is like, I think usually indoors there's nowhere there aren't as many like options. Like I feel like there's fewer places to hide if you like don't have the power to do the move or whatever, right? Like there's obviously, microbetas, and like sometimes there are options, but in general it's like it's pretty straightforward, and there's just like fewer, and I think in a way there's less like learning, if that makes sense. Like I feel like outdoors, like well, one, there are more options. For example, on Penrose, like I think people have done it probably like, or at least for what I think is the crux, people have done it probably like 5 different ways, right? Maybe for the first move, like I'm sure people have used like 5 or more different foot combinations. If you looked at like everyone's using like kind of subtly different feet, I think. And then for what I think is like I think the second move is the hardest in this example. I think there are also probably like, I don't know, at least like 3 or 4 different ways to do that move. Like I saw Taylor just like skipped it entirely. But even like, I think besides that, there are more. I can think of at least like 3 different feet I've seen people use. So yeah, I think like that's one thing, is like outdoors, there's more options. Like, I mean, generally there's more feet. Obviously this isn't always true, but I think on most boulders, like there's a few more like options for the hard move and you can find something that kind of like fits your body. So maybe because of that, like learning what we were talking about before, like learning how you find what fits your body is more of a skill. Like on the moon board, like learning what fits your body like doesn't really make sense, right? Because there's one way to do it. So
something I really think is important to point out when we're talking about this process of learning outdoors and all these different feet to use or body positions to use, I think it's important. I maybe you guys don't agree with this, but I think it's important to actually point out that learning and that using of technique actually has a physicality. It actually has a physical component, that when you learn different moves and it may require similar finger strength, but you move through a different plane of motion or through a different arc or whatever the case may be for that unique move, that you actually are, it's like, it's good technique, but there's actually like a physical component. And I think it's important to point that out, because I think what people hear is it's like, okay, good technique is just, putting your foot here and then going this way. But there's an element of that practice of good technique that physically imprints a different movement pattern, a different ability into your body that has a strength component. Like, oftentimes you'll climb outdoors on new rock or a new problem, and you'll get sore in weird areas, and you're like, man, what was that? So I just think that's like an important nuance, that you can't just hang on the hangboard all the time and then have quote unquote good technique and then just go and do anything. It's like there's an exposure to this big library of movements that needs to occur physically, not just mentally.
Yeah, I want to like try to reiterate like what you're saying, Josh, because I think this is really like what you were mentioning with the boards and like why it's significant, and Andy, like why you were answering. The Kilter board is like, you've been finding success on it. It's awesome. But also like, I think the significant thing that you're running into is also like the difference between, and this is why you're bringing up like, there's more options, and like, especially foot options most of the time on like rock climbing. And not to say that those foot options are like going to be that much physically easier or harder. They're probably all very similar. It's just like better for you and your size. And that's good to find as well. And a thing that I found really common and really frequent in my coaching was switching climbers between the gym, like the climbing gym, and like the climbing in the gym, and the boards. And the boards were like really, really good because I don't think that some climbing gyms, depending on the level of setting that they have, the quality of setting that they have, could be more board style, could be more outdoor style, right? And so it's not necessarily up to me to rely on that, but I can look at the climbs and I can make my assessment of like, what are they going to get challenged on? Are they going to get challenged on their ability to find or their ability to operate? And those are like two things that I kind of always, and that's kind of what Josh is talking about with the physicality aspect of, finding a nuance in a move is operation, right? Like knowing, okay, basically if I watched a climber try 10 times in the exact same setup, could they do differently each time? And the answer is always yes, right? And that's operation. And I think the boards, because they're so, I don't know, linear in output, like, yeah, here's the foot that you have. There's very little cheating. I'm glad that you're saying that too. Like that's an important aspect of board climbing. Yeah. Like, there's no cheating really available. Like there's some, very minimal, but like very few choices you can actually have.
There's some micro stuff available.
Sure.
I don't want to get into
But
it.
the
Keep
point
on
is
going.
that Sure, but the point is what you're focusing on, because there's less than outside, is that you're focusing on just the operation. You're just focusing on trying super hard in this toe. And could you try harder? Could you try it for longer? Could you try it for
Yeah.
like, I don't know, later in your move, like earlier in your move? You know, that's operation to me. And like I've always kind of labeled that as mechanics, and like finding specific mechanics and actually deconstructing which mechanics are actually important for the movement that you're doing. How long are the mechanics important for? It's just cool to
Yeah.
hear you say that that's the important, like, or that's the significance that you're finding on the boards. And like I think that, you know, what Josh is saying too, like, is a really important, almost like accusation that we have for climbers, that we have this on, you know, the podcast kind of regularly, which is like you're kind of training wrong. Like people train wrong. Like this is the right way to train. Andy's like talking about, it's so cool. Like, you know, this is, we've talked about this before, but like not necessarily in this way, you know, but like that's what board climbing is good for. That's also
Yeah.
what outdoor climbing is good for. You know, clearly those things work for your progression, and that's just, it was just cool to like break it down that way, because I really agree. I think that's super significant.
Yeah, one other thing I was thinking about on the like difference between, I guess mostly board climbing and outdoor climbing, is like the kind of learnability of moves. Like I feel like, and it makes sense because once, I mean, like the first time you ever climb on a given board or spray wall or whatever, obviously you'll be like learning the holds and the angles and whatever. So you'll improve like pretty fast from not knowing them at all to being like comfortable. But I feel like generally moves on boards or spray walls, it's like obviously they get a little bit easier from like the first to like the 10th. They're like, once I've tried them 10 times, the move feels a little bit easier than the first time I did it because I like understand it. But I don't feel like it gets like that much easier.
This is a good point.
Which kind of makes sense
Yeah,
because in a way, like if I've been climbing on the wall for a while, like I already know the, like even if I haven't tried that exact move, I like kind of know it. Like I know the holds, whatever. And then I feel like outside it's almost like the opposite. Like there could be moves that when I first try them, like we were talking about, like they're super uncomfortable, and I'm like, whoa, there's no way, like I don't get this at all. And then maybe like five days later, it's like, oh, I can like warm up on this move.
Well,
Like I feel like I've never seen, and maybe it's because I think it's like outside there's just more like variation. Obviously, like the angles are different, like the holds are like for a new climb, you've obviously never grabbed those exact holds before. So I think in a way, like I think that's a big difference. Is like you can learn, or at least for me, like I don't like learn moves on the board that much. It's like, oh, I like if I can't do them the first day, it's like, I mean, like maybe I still will do them later, but there's never a move where it's like, oh, I couldn't do it the first day and now it's like easy. It's like, oh, it's still going to be like if I couldn't do it pretty quick, it's still going to be pretty hard for me in general.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And it's almost like even, oh, sorry, one other thing, like with the, it's interesting you're saying like the commercial versus board, like I feel like they're almost polar opposites where like, or with commercial setting, I feel like they always will make the moves, depends on the gym obviously, but like I feel like the holds will always be in like the perfect place to make the move kind of like flow and ergonomic. Like there'll usually be like multiple foothold options to like accommodate different heights or whatever. I feel like the board is the opposite where like there'll almost never be like foothold options because just whoever set it, the footholds that work for them. And I feel like outdoors is like in between where there's usually options, but they're obviously not like set for you. So they're kind of like random. Like there's not like on any given outside route, there's obviously not like the perfect option for every height, but there are like some options. So it's almost like in between, if that makes sense.
yeah, no,
that's
it's super
cool.
interesting. I have a question to bring up. It's gonna kind of direct gears a little bit, but training. I know we've been talking about operation and mindset and like how you look and, you know, the brain, the theory, the logic behind climbing. But, you know, I remember like I remember talking about climbing a lot with you, like when we were going to Planet Granite a lot, and like I would watch you train. I think like sometimes, like I don't know, it wasn't necessarily significant. You didn't really speak about it to be significant, but you definitely train. Like you're definitely strong. And I guess like I have like two parts to this question, but any specific training things that you've worked on that really worked for your progression, do you think, or in, you know, in reflection, or really didn't work for your progression? Like it's clear that you are really pretty sure about your progression or like what things logically apply to climbing. Like, you know, I
Yeah.
think your sentiment about the boards being like unlearnable is just a sign of being a really good climber. Just like showing up to the board and being like, cool, I can read, bang, 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 foot there, grab this, go there. Like that's just being a good climber, and therefore you can use the board for what it's actually intended for. But it comes from a lot. But I guess, yeah, going back to that question about training, like, yeah, how would you answer that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like kind of what we were talking about before. Like I feel like from V13 to like 15 or 16, I guess, like I feel like I didn't like I think I did get stronger, but kind of naturally. Like I don't feel like there was like a it wasn't like I was like, oh, I like fingerboarded and got like I can't like hang like twice as much now or whatever. I can hang maybe like 15% more, maybe not even that much. And I think during that time I wasn't really, I mean, some of this is just like logistical because like a lot of it was during COVID, so the gyms were closed. But I feel, and I was just like, because that the gyms were closed, I was climbing outside a ton. But yeah, I feel like there wasn't like a specific training thing I was necessarily like would attribute. But it's interesting now. I feel like now it's almost like I've like, I don't know, I wouldn't say like reached my cap, but now I feel like I need to actually get stronger to improve. Like it's kind of like shifted back. And so I do feel like over the past like year or so, I have definitely been spending like a lot more time in the gym. Um, and yeah, like I don't think there's any like one magic thing that I would expect will like make me way stronger. Like I feel like a lot of them are like, oh, it could make me like 1% stronger on, I don't know, maybe not one, but like if I could get like 5% stronger fingers at this point, like that would still be pretty good. And at some point, like there's some limit climb where that will like, obviously that 5% would be the
But I'm
difference,
curious, like,
yeah,
like before V13, like, because it's pretty clear to you or to us that like from V13 and beyond, okay, maybe it wasn't physical things, but you did say that the curve earlier may have been quicker or like more obvious to you. And I guess like
yeah.
maybe those things just carried on for a long time. But what was there? I mean, yeah, same question, but like how about V13 and before?
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. I mean, I've been climbing since I was a kid, so obviously that helped. And like
Wait, how old are you, by the way?
29 now, yeah, getting up there.
I'm just curious.
Happens to the best of us.
But yeah, like I think I was never like even in kind of like what we were saying before. I don't think I've ever been like the most like naturally strong. I think part of that is also like I grew up sport climbing. Like I didn't even boulder until I was like, I mean, I would boulder in the gym obviously, but I didn't like seriously outdoor boulder until I was like in college probably. Like I remember going to Bishop,
Whoa.
or I bouldered in New England, but I remember going to Bishop for the first time. I was like, whoa, like this is like what it's like. This is like real. This is like what like world class bouldering looks like, right? Like, and that was in college.
Wow.
So I think, but basically where I'm going with that is I think because of that, like I never have like, and I think to this day I still don't have like a super powerful style, and I think that is kind of from like my sport climbing background, like.
Wow.
But yeah, for training, like, so I'll try to actually get to the question. Like, I don't think I had like a super specific training routine in college or high school. Like, I would do like kind of general strength, a lot of like TRX, pulling exercises. I feel like lately, actually, I've gotten more into like now I'd say actually hangboard and lift like a decent amount, and I think
What?
it does. Yeah, like I think it
That's
does
crazy
help.
to me.
I mean, it's obviously like kind of incremental. Like it's not like I like started hangboarding and was like, well, I'm like way better now. I think it helps like me a little bit, and like the lifting, I think helps like a little bit. So, but yeah, in college, like I don't think there was a super specific plan for me.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you were a big sport climber as a kid, or you're mainly a sport climber, and this was another thing that Max Zolotukhin pointed out was that you came out of the Boston Rock Gym team, and
Yeah,
so many world class climbers started there as well. There's you, your sister, Mike Foley, Tristan, his brother
yeah,
Roland, Stick, or Brian Nugent also
yeah,
came out of there, and Augie Cohn.
yeah,
Whoa.
yeah.
And yeah, just
I
kind of
didn't know that.
curious what that was like. Is there something? What was in the water? Yeah, how did you guys all come out of
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know, maybe my sister's talked about this before, but I think one good thing was like people were really psyched and like genuinely into climbing and having fun. And like I think even like everyone would like hang out together. It was like had I mean, I'm still friends with like all those people to this day. So I think that's like the kind of leads to like why everyone stuck with it. It's just because growing up like climbing, it was actually fun, and we definitely weren't like it's funny looking back. I'm like, oh, if I had been on like Vertical World, would I be like amazing or something? Like if I had like
You are amazing, Andy.
you know, like one of the really like if I had been on like one of like the really really good teams, what would I be like now? Like I mean, impossible to answer, obviously. So yeah, I think like kind of we didn't necessarily have like the most like regimented training, and I mean people did like pretty well at comps, but it wasn't like none of us are like, you know, amazing at comps now, right? And I think like in youth it was similar. Like people would like make national finals, but there's no one who was like the child star like blowing out every nationals. But I do think it like because a lot of like even we would have summer camp in Rumney, New Hampshire, and it was like it was pretty like miserable conditions during the summer looking back. Like it was like 95 and humid every day, and like
Oh my god.
I feel like people like we'd climb, but it was like I don't know. Just when it's 95 and humid, you like don't want to climb. But it was always like really fun, you know. And I think that's like, and even like in high school, like a lot of people would like they'd like go out climbing together on their own, not with not like an official trip or whatever. So I think that's kind of like the best thing that came out of it is just like everyone genuinely was into climbing and like wanted to stick with it, you know.
Yeah. So what I heard from that is just actual total psych, you know, really, really enjoying it. And it makes me think of the crew that I last saw you with in Colorado before you all left. And you had this crew of, gosh, let me look at my list. Just there was,
Yeah.
well, there's Daniel Fong, there is Tristan, and Liam Bancroft, and when I was there, Stick was there, and also Austin Purdy, who I don't know super well, but just have been following his climbing, and he's done super well. And what's interesting is that you guys also were all super psyched. Like there was just this energy that you all kind of were getting out, getting after it, trying hard things, and you know, again, I don't know if when I was there, if I would have picked you out as being kind of the one who would continue to excel and do super well. I mean, all those guys I think have now climbed V15, but you know, I got to tell you, Andy, I would argue that your tick list kind of stands above them. And you know, I guess what makes me wonder is I always think it's interesting to ask, what did you see in that group of people? And maybe it is just that psych, that bonding together. And then, you know, what's that thread you see? And if that is the thread, then maybe I'll ask you a different way and say, what were each of their superpowers? Because if you lined all you guys up, physically, you all look so different. I mean, just really different sizes, styles. And, you know, I think it's fun to see what other climbers pick out in other climbers, because sometimes we're not even aware of what our superpower is. And, you know, that's all also, so what were their superpowers? And I'm going to ask you, what was your or what is your superpower?
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about this a bit, and I mean you're kind of hinting at in the question. Like I do think what allowed everyone in that list in that group to excel is just like commitment. Like I think and just getting out and climbing a ton and like yeah, like it's over it's kind of sounds like a little too simplistic, but I think everyone in that group like tries really hard either in the gym or outside and also like gets out a lot. Like I think more than I think that's what's unusual compared to like the I don't know, like quote unquote like average climber or whatever. Like I was thinking about this story about Austin. So it was like over the summer. I was up in like upper with my sister and then like a bunch of other people. And I think Austin was supposed to meet us, but like later, so we weren't really sure when he was showing up or whatever. And then it was like storming through the afternoon, so we were kind of just like I think we like eventually climbed, but it was like raining for a bunch of the day. And then we're hiking down and it's dark at like it's like 8 or 9. It's probably like 9 p.m. because of the summer. And it was like definitely dark. And we see someone hiking up and Austin's just like going up the end. And I was like, whoa. And I guess like and I was like, are you like going up there right now? Like alone at 9 p.m.
That's hardcore.
Like that sounds. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't. I wouldn't do that. Definitely sounds like kind of sketch.
Yeah, Austin's pretty
but
dedicated. He seems pretty
yeah, and I
dedicated.
think the craziest thing was like he was like, "Oh yeah, I was late because like I cut my foot on an axe in my apartment." Like I guess he had one.
Oh my god.
There's like super. There's a funny tangent, but like you know that hotter than chicken comp. I think
yeah.
he had like won that, and somehow the prize was like an actual axe, like a working sharp axe. And he said he had like he had like stepped on it or something in his apartment and cut his foot. I was like, damn, this guy's going up there. Like, I would definitely not go there alone at like starting at 9 p.m. with like a cut up foot or whatever.
Bears can smell that, by the
But
way.
yeah, I was like, wow, like this.
Oh
yeah.
man.
I don't know. It's just also it's like you're up there. Like I don't feel like you want to be alone up there at night. But anyway, like what I'm getting at here is like I do think that everyone in that group like is just like really psyched on like maybe too much so in that story I would argue. But like people like they just have put in a lot of time and a lot of effort too.
Yeah.
And are willing to like try things that are hard for them.
Having that
crew, yeah, it's kind of
is
like
just
a simple answer, but
no, I think that it's kind of simple on the surface where it's like get out and do it with your buddies, but actually it takes a very concerted effort to find that crew. And I think that it's always been like that for me too. It's like I just remember being there in the that summer and just being around you guys and thinking, dude, if I want to level up, like this is what I need to do. I need to be here with these guys. Of course, my wife was pregnant, and we actually did almost move out to Boulder, but you know, life gets in the way sometimes. But you know, I just think there's something to be said with that. You know, or you know, those people and making that happen is harder than it sounds.
Oh yeah, I was gonna like I think yeah, like I said, it's like simple, but I do think like in a way you've just got to like give yourself a lot of opportunities and a lot of experience and do that consistently. Like even this goes way back to something I was thinking about earlier about like how do you level up or whatever. But there was like one of my friends was saying like, hey, I really want to climb like V13. Like what like tips do you have? And I was like, well, like what like V13s have you tried and like how have they gone? How have they been like going? It's like, oh, like actually,
Interesting.
or like maybe they tried like one. And I was like, well, I feel like to start you should like you need to be trying like if you want to do them, you need to be there trying them, obviously. Like I think it's hard. Obviously there's some people that are just like freaks in the gym or like if you're winning like a World Cup, like yeah, you're just so strong, like of course you can go outside and just immediately climb like V15. But I think for like the average person, I think they maybe don't realize like how that they need to be giving themselves like more opportunity and more experience, and you can't necessarily get that like just in the gym for the average person. So.
Isn't that funny that like the hindsight answer of that, like once you go and do that, once you're doing that with a big crew or like even just hang out with a big crew, like once you go out and just doing it all the time, you're right. These are all simple answers that you're talking about in hindsight, but it's like for some reason for a lot of people and you know even for like probably us at some points it's like it's not straightforward to like what's the next answer, right? And like that's again you know the common thread that I point to you is and the comment that I'm trying to like highlight about you is that you're good at answering those questions. You're good at finding those questions. You're good at like answering those questions about like, well, how do I get better, you know? And like even your friend asking you like, hey Andy, like got any advice for climbing V13? You ask him a question directly like, well, which ones have you tried? Like how many have you? It's like you're doing that to yourself. I guess this kind of leads to another question that I have, which sprouted from the other question that I had about training. But really interesting also that you're talking about. I didn't know this about you at all, but you started sport climbing. That was your background, and you didn't even boulder that much until like later in your climbing career. And I guess like I always thought about you as someone who was really, really strong fingers and amazing footwork in terms of like physical attributes. Mental attributes aside, what attributes of a climber do you think, if those are the most important ones, I'd be curious to hear you say that. But what other attributes of a climber do you think are really important to get to a similar level as yourself? And would you invest in any of other types of attributes? You know, do you find like in watching other climbers, you're like, wow, that could be really, really effective for like, you know, specific climbs that I've tried in the past or climbs that I'm trying now? I guess like, yeah, when it comes to that, like full analysis, and I'm sure you do this often or regularly, but like, yeah, have you found one that you're like, oh, missing, or you're like totally content, you're like, no, this is all I'm stoked on, like I just want those 5% gains and everything.
Yeah. So I guess we're talking mostly about like physical attributes. Yeah. So I guess it's the finger strength is interesting because I think this kind of goes back to like how I grew up climbing. I do feel like a lot of the Northeast style, you end up like full crimping a lot. And so I think because of that, I think my full crimp is actually really strong. Like I think this is like a funny thing to say, but like I don't really feel like there's ever been like a straight on like full crimp where I was like, oh, like I feel like I need my fingers to be stronger.
Jealous,
and obviously they're kind of like but I think that's because like that's like my main, that's like how I grew up, is like I feel like by far the strongest in that. And then weirdly also in drag, which is kind of the opposite. Like I like 3-finger drag a lot of things, and that's probably from like growing up as a kid sport climbing or something. I think in the middle is like I definitely feel the weakest on like half crimp and like mini pinches,
which is a lot of gym climbing.
Yeah. And like it's funny, like I feel like, I mean, I think that's actually something that the hangboard has been pretty helpful for. Like I think I'm okay. Like I can like hang the Beastmaker outside edge, but not for like long. But so one interesting thing is like I don't necessarily feel like that always like I don't think like that alone, it translates a little bit, but I still don't feel like I'm as strong as I could on those when I'm actually climbing. And so I don't exactly know like
yeah,
what
that's
the
super
answer is.
interesting.
Like probably like a good thing would be like actually climbing like actually climbing in those. Like even this goes back to like, I think this is kind of something we were talking about before, like when to use your weaknesses and not. Like I've noticed like even on the board, it's like if say I need to do like a deep lock off, like I'll still definitely favor my fulcrum because it's just like I feel like I can pull kind of like in way more with it, and I just feel like most comfortable there. And that's something where it's like, oh, I should probably stop doing that when I'm training, right? Or at least like redo those moves where I can kind of tell like if I probably could like be kind of like half crimp or mini pinching this, but I just feel more comfortable full crimping.
That's such a good little mental trick, by the way, for training. Like just to remind yourself, like maybe I can do it with less effort here because the effort will be spent here, and I should just practice that, and I should do it again.
Yeah.
Maybe like a way to practice to see if I can do it that way. It's a good mental
like
tip.
it's almost like I feel like I've improved on the hangboard, but it requires like some translation too. So yeah, like for sure that kind of the grips that aren't like full crimping or drag, I definitely feel like could get better at. And even this is kind of like similar to the options outside. Like outside you usually just do have the option to full crimp. Yeah. But sometimes it's maybe not the best way. So like I think if I felt stronger in mini pinching, it would like open up other, like maybe sometimes like on moves outside I'm like covering up my weakness because I can just end up full crimping, but it makes like some other aspect of the move worse or later move worse or whatever. So yeah, like I think that's like one of the main things where I was like, oh, it would be really nice to be like way stronger than that.
Wait, isn't it funny though that like because I've asked like other strong climbers too, and a common answer that strong climbers will always lean towards stronger hands in some way, like either the full crimp, half crimp, pinch, mini pinch, sloper, like something about hand strength seems to be like, because I'm asking about your entire body's physical attribute.
Yeah, actually, I have a decent
most climbers
answer
will
for
say
this too.
hands.
I thought
cool.
So I do feel like my like having not necessarily like stronger, but more like durable legs, I think would help. Especially, so this is from climbing in Squamish. I'm like, a lot of times, like the limiting thing is like my legs. Like my upper body isn't like sore at all, but I'm like, oh, like my knees are kind of like. And I actually haven't found. I've been like experimenting with a bunch of different things, and I haven't found like one thing that makes it so I'm like, oh, I feel like I have like bomb-proof legs. Like I could. It's funny because like I mean, just from a lifetime of climbing, it's like you're obviously used to doing like hundreds of like doing a lot of like moves with your upper body, like kind of physical moves with your upper body, like shouldn't be tweaky. Like maybe you're kind of tired, But then there's something about like heel hooks is like I just can't do as many, if that makes sense. Or like I notice like my knees get like sore pretty fast. And I've been looking for like kind of experimenting with different exercises that would just make my legs stronger in that way. And I haven't found anything that's like amazing for heel hooks yet. But
Be careful. I'm sure you know of squamish knee. Squam knee is a real thing. So, uh, yeah, Andy, I will trade you some of my min pin strength for some of your full crimp strength. But I've just actually, I want to shift gears and talk about squamish and a project you're on there. But I just gotta ask, when you talk about this full crimp, just this love of full crimp. So, just when you climb, I assume you've done stained glass or maybe Thunderbird or something like this. Like when you grab that left hand on stained glass, are you just like, oh yeah, whatever, like this is a jug? Like what do you mean by that? You've never encountered just a straight on full crimp and just been like, this is difficult. Can you give me some examples?
yeah.
That holds so bad.
So I mean, it's like it's funny because obviously they're like it's not like, oh, every full crimp move I can do, right? Like it's definitely not that. I guess it's like on most of those moves, I don't feel like being stronger in the full crimp would necessarily help me. Whereas like with like mini pinching, for example, it's funny. I've actually never tried this, but on like hypno, it seems like you need to like mini pinch, and maybe because of that, I like haven't tried. Where it's like, oh, like I could see trying that move and being like, oh shit, I'm just like can't hold this and pull. Whereas for example, like the Thunderbird example, like I mean I could see like, oh, it's hurting a lot, obviously. Like I think if I tried that move, that would be like I feel like the limiting factor for me is like ow, this is like destroying my skin because this spike is in my index. Like obviously that's still an issue. But on like the Thunderbird move, I don't feel like it was ever like, oh, I can't pull hard enough, if that makes sense. Stained glass, I don't remember honestly. But so one thing I would say is like I think I could also get better at grips where it's only where all four fingers aren't on. Maybe that like I think that's something could be good to train on the hangboard because I think it's almost just like a comfort thing is like I'm not as used to climbing with like a mono or whatever, so I'm not.
Okay, well, I'm looking for some trick. When I think of that Thunderbird move, which is this, you grab a right hand kind of razor and do a big move where most of the time, most people's feet cut to grab a good left hand edge. And for me, I can just, that's the stand start to direction. And so for me, I can just climb into Thunderbird all day long and then get shut down by that move. And so I'm always just like, how do you do it? But anyways, I actually wanted to point out that your sister kind of had some similar thoughts on getting strong fingers and
full crimping.
Yeah. And I mean, well, yeah, she could full crimp as well. But just, she kind of felt that the hangboard didn't really translate in the way that she hoped it would. And that really, it seemed like for her, she got stronger climbing outdoors on that Thunderbird crimp instead of trying to mimic it on a hangboard. And so, yeah, we'll have to go deeper into that because for some reason you can't just tell me the magic thing that will just solve all my problems. But we were talking a little bit about Squamish there. I know you're based, largely in the Seattle area now, and you've been spending some time up in Squamish, which was no surprise that you're talking about Ethan Salvo, who's up there crushing. And I heard from a number of people, you were one of them, that you have an interesting project there, and it's a room service low, and Max Latukin actually argued that
I don't know what the name actually is.
Have Max help you name it. He knows how to name things, but Max argued they thought it might be one of the hardest things on the West Coast when it goes. And also it's got to be one of the cooler looking hard climbs. So I just wanted you to kind of describe the climb, where it's at, how it breaks down, and how it's going as a project.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's the low start to room service.
But tell me where room service is, like, because that whole little area is like freaking iconic.
Yeah, it's pretty sick. So basically the room is like the area under Dreamcatcher forms a cave, basically. So there's like Dreamcatcher, there's like the Dreamcatcher boulder. It's like a giant boulder. And then there's like another sport climb kind of like opposite Dreamcatcher or like a 90-degree angle, Silent Menace. So that kind of forms this like room, and then there's basically like a boulder in it. Like it probably fell off Dreamcatcher or something, a million years ago. So yeah, on that, and that boulder has the Singularity, which I know you guys have talked about a bit, and then Room Service, which is a classic like 11 or 12 in Squamish. And so yeah, the funny thing is like, so I actually maybe on my first trip here, like on one of I'd taken a few trips to Squamish before I moved here or moved to Seattle. And I did room service during one of those trips. I think actually I think I flashed it. And then when I moved here, so and I think at that time Nale had done the mid start, but it was like he never posted video of it, so it was kind of like a mystery. Like we were just looking, oh, like where, like where does this thing even start? Like it kind of looks the mid like looks impossible. And I was just here for like a 1 week trip, so didn't like maybe messed around on it a tiny bit, but didn't like actually climb on it. And then so when I moved here, I think like I when I started coming up to Squamish, I think the first thing I want to do is the Reckoning, because that's like the kind of mega classic harder thing in Squamish. So I did that, and then I think that it was like a really nice day out. Like it was probably like mid-September, the first day I moved, and I was all like psyched. I was like, oh, I think I did it pretty fast that day. So I was like, what should I go try? And anyway, like I tried it like a few days after that, or maybe that day. And Paul Nadler and Tim Doyle were trying it, so I kind of like got a bunch of data from them, because it's definitely really cryptic. Like, and I didn't even know where it started, because like Nale never posted like a video or anything. I think and maybe at that point it had a second ascent, but there was like no video or like even really photos of where it started. So I climbed on a bunch of them, which was really fun that fall. I'd say it probably took me like 7 or 9 days to do the mid. That's why I say like October is usually when it kind of starts being like miserable up here. Like it starts just dumping rain. Like I tried it that initial session or two with them. It was like really nice mid-September. So I was doing like pretty decent. Like I think I was like doing the moves, or like at first I could do like one move at a time, and then I kind of started linking. The good thing about this is because it's basically sheltered by Dreamcatcher and Silent Menace, it'll like actually stay dry for a while. So it's like that and the Singularity are like the last things in Squamish to get wet. So a lot of days it'd be like I was up here for a week, I would be like the only one in the lot, because I mean everything it's just like pouring rain. But yeah, I came back and just did it like first go from the bottom, which makes sense because I went from like literally trying it wet to like really good conditions. And yeah, it was just like doing the mid felt like amazing. I feel like this doesn't usually happen to me, but I just like pulled on. I was like, oh, like I'm for sure doing it. Because even like the first moves, I was like, whoa, these feel so much better than I'm used to. So like the really low start below the mid is very obvious. I think even I've heard stories of like Chris Sharma like trying this really low start, because it's basically like these two rails that like go to the bottom. So it's like pretty, and there's that like the start holds are actually like pretty good, and you start like basically sitting. So it's pretty like obvious.
How hard is the mid?
So the stand is like 11 or 12. The mid is like 14, but I feel like it's like pretty hard for 14. Yeah, I mean, I think it took Nale a while, and then like I've climbed, I think it's kind of comparable to like, or maybe like harder. At least it took me way longer than like the Big Island, which is like a similar kind of compression style, I think. So yeah, I feel like it's like pretty hard 14. But yeah, anyway, like so I came back that spring, and I knew like Keenan had tried the low moves, and I think he had like done all of them, or at least had been like, yeah, I think he had done all of them. The very low start, there's kind of like there's like 3 like pretty hard moves with heel hooks, and then after that you're kind of like you have like a few like transition moves into the mid. And I think that very first day I actually did that sequence of 3 moves, and I was like I hadn't figured out the how to transition into the mid or whatever, but I was like, oh, like I'm like, okay, it's not that bad. Like I think I'm just gonna do this, because like when I did the mid, it just felt like easy in a way, because it's so like learned, and then I just got perfect conditions. I was like, all right, like I think I can just do this. It's interesting. I my kind of like theory about it, or about Squamish climbing in general, is like I think linking is way harder. Like adding links is like way harder than a lot of other areas. Maybe because it's so like humid, or like it's such like finicky climbing or something. But yeah. So anyway, like I've been trying this low project a ton, which I think adds like, I'd say it probably adds like the bottom is like at least V12, I'd say. Probably harder. Like, I don't think too many people have actually climbed through it. So I think it's like 12 or 13 into this mid start. But yeah, it's sick. It's like kind of perfect power endurance. Like, it's like 18-ish moves, and there's no like nowhere to, you could like maybe chalk once, but it's like there's no like rests, and there's no like easy moves. So yeah, it's pretty cool. It's like the overview.
Yeah, no, it's great. Max was so psyched on this as a project. It's hard to set the stage for people who haven't been there, but it's just a magical little area. It was cool hearing you talk about working on the mid with Tim Doyle and Paul Nadler, who are just legends of that area. I mean, Tim Doyle was the one who did Singularity. He's the one who FA'd that.
I think it was actually different. It was a different.
Oh, it's Tim Clifford, right? It's Tim Clifford. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Tim Doyle is still the magician of that area. Anyways, he's incredible. And this room service, if you ever walk up there, I'll post a picture. We have this hilarious picture of when I was there, me, Max, and Mark, and we're all like fondling it, like just kind of like stacked on top of each other, because it's this blunterette that just seems so improbable. It's just very, it's very techy, but it's still reasonably steep. And that's so cool that it's just this consistent power endurance that just has an obvious start, and then has a no big break with any kind of place to chalk up. I'm just kind of curious to, I don't know. I'm psyched for it. I hope today's good conditions let you maybe take it down. You'll have to let us know so we can update on the
I tried it a lot at this point. If this was like anything else, I'd be like, oh, like I'm close, because the links, I have like a pretty huge overlap at this point. Like, I've done it from 3 moves in, which is like, it's technically a climb, but not like, it's not like an obvious start, but it's just like the lowest point you can like naturally pull on, basically. Like, pulling on lower than that, you just like couldn't really without a power spot. So I've done it from 3 moves in, and then actually this spring I got like a high point. I basically got to like the third to last move, which is like a 12 move overlap or whatever. So it's like, oh, I feel like I would think I'm close, but then I'm like, I still don't know how close I am, especially because the very last hard move is like definitely kind of like a red point crux. Like, when I was trying this link from 3 moves in, I would fall there. Like, I probably fell there like 10 times on this link. On the you do like a one big bump to a sloper jug, and then it's kind of over. But that move is like hard. Like, oh, this move is going to be so hard from the bottom. So yeah, I'm like, it's funny. I'm like, I could be close or I could not be. It's like so hard for me to do.
Yeah. I'm going to be really curious when you do it, what you end up grading it, because in some ways, when I do that grading math, and you say like, oh, it's V13 kind of bottom, or V12 bottom to V13, where you're, then getting into like a hard 14. It's like, what does that add up to? And it's just interesting how not all climbs use the same grade math, which is normally like, oh, a V12 into a V12 is V14, where depending on how those intro moves are and where the crux is, and that power endurance plus humidity and unable to chalk, and I don't know, just Max, and after hearing about it from you, interesting to see it. That will be one of the hardest lines on the West Coast, most likely, and one of the prettiest. So thanks for sharing your process on it. Sounds freaking awesome, man. I wish you luck.
Yeah, it's sick.
Dude.
It's like people always talk about like what's like their limit of climbing, and the funny thing is, like, I don't feel like anything I've climbed up till now has ever been like limit. Like, it's obviously been hard and taken me like a while, but it's never been like, oh, like that was actually like I don't think I could climb harder than that or whatever. And some goes on this, I'm like, man, like, I feel like I'm in good shape. Like, I think mentally I'm there, and like I think I actually climbed it perfectly, and I'm just like I actually think I was doing like about as well as I could, and just didn't like, and it's still hard. So I'm like, maybe this is
That's
like,
awesome.
it's like, it feels like it's like would be close to my limit. Like, if you added like 2 more hard moves, I'd be like, all right, I'm just like I'd give up at that point or something.
Yeah.
So
It's so cool. I mean, it's so cool. Like once you get to, a level where you're at, like, well, what is the limit? Like what is the limit? And like, I feel like maybe we're getting closer. Like maybe we're getting closer. Who knows? Like who knows really what that looks like? But that's awesome. I found it really funny, like how classic. Never been to this area, and I know exactly what the entire area looks like. Feels like, I know exactly what that climb looks like. I know the beta on that climb. That climb's really room service is very, very, famous climb. Like, and I've never been to Squamish, and I think it's really striking to me, like something I've learned over the last couple of years in climbing. Like projects are just like sometimes right in front of you, like right in front of you, walked by all the time, touched all the time, and like it's just a matter of someone going and doing them. But also at the same time, if people aren't doing them, they're probably really, really, really hard and like really cryptic. And I think it's also interesting, like the style that you're explaining about Squamish, like, hard to project, hard to link, like hard to, feel perfect in conditions, like
yeah.
ever, like doing the whole thing. And yeah, it makes it probably like a full experience. I'm really curious to see what it's going to end up like, in terms of grade and like what it looks like for you and what you name it, how your experiences on it. But yeah, is anyone else like is trying it as much as you, or like?
So I know like Ethan's climbed on it a bit, and I think he's climbed into the mid. So he's like done this bottom boulder, I think. And then I know Lucas has like climbed on it a bit. I forget if he's I don't know I'm not sure how much or if he's been climbing on it lately.
Man, he should. He's so
But yeah.
strong.
The nice thing is like usually there are people trying the other starts or the singularity, so it's like yeah, I mean, I don't know. Usually like there are people climbing on it.
Lucas claimed that second ascent of the singularity, right? No one else. Wait, did Nale do it? No, I think it was Lucas who got the second
Yeah,
ascent.
Nale did it.
Right?
Yeah.
Nale did. Okay, that's right. Yeah,
because it was done like a long time ago. And
then, yeah.
Nale
Still,
did it. I think that was the second. Yeah.
still really cool. Well, hearing about just this big project and getting attracted to it, and finding that next level, it just actually makes me want to ask you this question I got from your sister Katie Lamb, and it's super simple. And what motivates you in climbing? Like, what is your overarching goal?
What motivates me? I'm trying to think of
Katie.
Something that's not like really
It's deep, Katie.
really
Yeah.
simplistic. So I mean, on the one hand, like I do still find like the day to day of climbing like fun. I mean, most of the time. Obviously, like it's interesting. Like once you get serious about things, obviously there are like emotional highs and lows, right? Like I mean, failing never feels good, right? But I do feel like I do still find just like the process of climbing like super fun. I still like look forward to going outside, like going to the gym. I don't know. Like I definitely like I couldn't imagine my life without climbing, I suppose. Like I don't really know like what I'd be doing. I mean, or I have other things in my life, obviously, but like if it just got cut out, I'm like, I don't really know like what like I think having like a focus is good, Like having like goals is good. So yeah, like I mean, I think like a lot of it is like the standard things like takes you to cool places. You meet people, you hang out with people. That process is always like fun, right? Like just sessioning on things with people is always fun. Yeah, I still love the movement. And then I think it's also the goals and progression. Yeah, it's hard to figure out how to say this without sounding super cheesy, but like I think like the process of overcoming something is really cool, and having goals to keep you motivated is really cool. Like say if I could just like magically send everything but not like feel like I was actually getting better in some way, I don't think it would feel good. Like if I just had like yeah, if someone was like, oh, it felt like even this project, if someone was like, oh, it's like way stickier today or something. I mean, I don't know that like if I somehow magically did it, but it didn't feel like I had like learned anything or improved on it at all, I don't think that would necessarily feel amazing. Like maybe another way of saying that is almost like once you do something, it's like, oh, cool. Now like the next thing feels doable. Like that, like you can like build on that for the future. So yeah, I mean, some of it's just really basic, like the day to day, but I do think when you think about like the average person in life, like I don't mean to sound like derogatory, but the average person doesn't have like goals that they like directly control, right? Like at work, like obviously, you can get promoted, like you can have a career, but for it's kind of still like dependent on a lot of external factors, and you could like not try hard at all and still have a successful career, maybe like just kind of fluke it, or the opposite, like you could try hard and because of factors like not succeed. And I think it's like it is cool to have something that's like directly under your control, like it's all up to you, and it's just like a physical thing, like it's like can you do it or not. And I think like in kind of modern society, I guess, like I don't think most people actually have that. It's kind of like, yeah, and I don't mean that to sound like derogatory or like putting climbing on a pedestal at all, but it is cool
don't
that
worry.
it's like you just go out there and like
There's no normies listening.
yeah.
we don't have to worry. No one accidentally stumbled on the Testpiece podcast and is like, God, these climbers are just a bunch of jerks. They don't get it.
Like I guess another way of saying that is like when you go out climbing, it's like either you do it or you don't. It's kind of up to you. I think that's something that isn't actually like most people don't have that in their life. I mean, it's kind of cool to like have that kind of direct goal that you control. Yeah.
It makes me think of how your sister talked. I mean, I'm not surprised that you guys have progressed so far because you've really fallen in love with the process of coming up against difficulty and then having that persistence to see it through, and not just, and then not focusing on that goal at the end in the sense of, okay, I did this climb, I checked that box and now it's done. But you guys both kind of expressed this love of the process of the butting up against difficulty and find your way through. And God, it's a good reminder, man. It may sound cheesy or trite or whatever, but loving that process really is the path to success. And I made a comment earlier about how did you just stumble ass backwards into V16? And it's funny, but it's in some ways it's true in that it's like to go from V5 to V6 is to progress and is to be in love with that progression, that what it takes. And so, yeah, how do you go from V15 to V16? Well, you progress. You fall in love with the details and show up. So now that hits home, man.
And I think they're definitely still those sends that are like super memorable. Like even the Spectre, it's like I still kind of like remember how that feels like 8 years later or whatever. Like it's still kind of like a magic.
Was that 8 years ago?
I don't know. I mean, maybe.
Probably.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Probably. Like,
oh my God.
Like I still have like random memories of that day of like driving home. Like it's still kind of like a magic memory.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's pretty rare, right? There won't be that many.
Yeah.
Even like doing the nest is like similar because that was like super meaningful to me. You just remembered a lot of random things about that day and like how it felt. But I think the flip side is like that's like pretty rare, right? Like you don't, or even like a lot of the sends I have, it's not like obviously like they're cool. Like I'm happy, but it's not like the ones you'll remember forever. I think are still pretty rare. Most of it is you're not even sending, so it's like that you need to like enjoy the day to day of it for sure.
It's crazy that you say that too, but yeah, it's funny that like it is rare, and I didn't know that, and I didn't expect it. And I took it for granted, and looking back, it's like wow, that was just a moment of a guy who was seemingly a normal guy in a lot of ways, but a guy going to Stanford who was really really good at climbing, and just like we had, I don't know, it was just a moment, but the moment was special because of the desire and your approach and the progression, and then you just did it, and I think like I just didn't realize how rare it was because of how simple you make it look, and like, I guess going throughout a lot of my climbing career, it's been pretty profound to me. It's come up a lot in a lot of discussions that I've had. I use that story a lot to explain like, just like, I mean, you can really focus up, like, you can, that could easily have affected a lot of different people. And most people I think really would not have come back from that fumble.
Yeah.
But like, man, it was just like, it wasn't necessarily even what happened. It was you. It was your headspace. It was like how you looked. It's what you said, and it's what you did. And like, yeah, so profound, so unique, so rare, and like, yeah, it was special to me. Is so cool.
Yeah.
It's fun to hear all the background. Fun to hear like the deeper thoughts.
Yeah.
One last thing I thought was just interesting. When we last chatted, you made a offhand comment about how even if you turn pro, like you do have a normal job. You said even if you had turned pro, it probably wouldn't help you climb harder. And I just, the reason why I want to bring this up is this idea about what makes someone a good climber or doesn't. That's kind of been a lot of what we've talked about during this podcast, like how you actually have progressed. And I just found it interesting where you had this analysis on your climbing, and you made a comment that, if you were to turn pro, it wouldn't change you did not think that that was going to unlock anything in your climbing career. I just kind of wanted to ask you why you think that is, or what you mean by that.
Yeah, I guess like what I mean by is like I don't think that my limiting factor is like access to climbing. I guess. So I mean, yeah, like I have a normal job, but I still do have like I still get out and climb a lot. Like even over the summer, I was like when I was in Colorado for like 3 months, and I mean I was climbing outside like 4 or 5 days a week usually. And then here it's like the weather is kind of worse, and like or like the weather in Squamish and Washington in fall is like you're definitely not climbing outside every day. But I mean, there's still like windows. Like I still probably climb outside like 2 days a week, and I feel like that's actually quite a good balance for me. Like after the summer, I was like, I'm pretty psyched to like be in the gym more and start training. And so lately, I've had the balance of like I'll climb outside, yeah, like 2 days a week, and then usually in the gym like 3 days, something like that. I'm actually up here in Squamish for a week, so like I probably won't go to the gym. But yeah, I feel like that's like a good balance for me. I actually don't feel like, oh, if I could train like 8 hours a day, I'd be way better. And even when I go to the gym, like I'll go for a while. So this is like I'll go to the gym for like usually like 4 to 6 hours. So it's not like, oh, like hour 8 through 10 is like where the gains are made. Or I don't think that's like for me. So on the one hand, I still do have like a decent amount of like, or I kind of still structure my life so I like can go climbing a lot while
Where do you
also
make
having like
time
a pretty
for all that Netflix? Like, are you, maybe you just, the reason why I bring it up is 'cause it hit home for me as someone who is,
yeah.
working a lot, and I have some kids, but it also made me think of something actually you said earlier about people who really get sucked into the gym, or actually it also makes me think of something your sister said about what she called the never readies, people who just train and train and train. And it just got to me because it made me think about, sometimes we set up these conditions in our head about what we need for success, rather than just kind of showing up and trying the hard boulders, like you were saying, where we were talking about, is it the training that got you to those hard boulders, or did the hard boulders get you stronger on these strength metrics? Yeah, it hit home to me because I have a lot of excuses that are theoretically valid. It's like, oh well, I've got to do this work, or I've got these kids. And I just I like that, rather than you pointing at something that maybe you couldn't easily change. Where, I mean, yeah, sure, maybe it'd be nice to sit around always and then just go climbing whenever you feel like it, but that you didn't somehow credit some theoretical situation as to why, or as to how you could get better. And instead it's just this acknowledgement of, this is me, this is today, what do I have in my control? And clearly, you're making the most of it still.
Yeah. Isn't there a book about like the how having like too much choices? I'm completely forgetting
The paradox of choice.
yeah, exactly. Like I think I have like the right amount of constraint where like if I could just go like anywhere at any time, I probably like even this Squamish project, like whether I do it or not, it's been like an amazing experience. But it's also like I've kind of mostly been trying it because I don't have like that much else to try. Like I mean, I have a lot of like there are obviously other things, but like that's like the main thing. Like if I could just fly to Switzerland, like maybe I would have given up on this a while ago and just been like, oh, just like go might as well like go somewhere else, right? Like in a way, it's been good to have like some like I think having like that constraint has made me like kind of dive really deep on Squamish, which has been a really like valuable experience. Like it's definitely kind of led to experiences that I might not have had. Like if I could just go anywhere in the world, I probably wouldn't have gotten them. So yeah, like I think like having some constraint isn't necessarily bad. And obviously, like, you know, people have real constraints in their lives, and they shouldn't give, like, you shouldn't, like, yeah, like,
should I abandon my kids? Yeah, should I just leave my kids by themselves, and just because Andy told me I need to go climbing more? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, and that's like, that's real. I think it's like being realistic too. Like, if you're only climbing outside like once a year, or if you're going outside for like one trip a year because of the constraints in your life, then like just be realistic about what that means, I guess, right? And like, obviously, like, in that case, you do the best you can, and you train in the gym a lot. Like, even the anecdote about the person who was asking me like, how do I climb V13? Well, it's like they just don't have that many 13s accessible to them, so it's like, realistically, it's like hard because of that, right? Like, obviously, if you don't have as much opportunity, it'll be hard.
Yeah, so. Something that you said that really resonated with me was where you said that you kind of fell in love with Squamish. Like, you know, you went deep, or sorry, you said you went deep on Squamish, and you didn't have a ton of projects there left, so you went in on this one. And it's just something that reminds me about, I think we did a podcast on this, Tim, and it's just this, when you deal with constraints, it's really helpful to fall in love with whatever it is that you have. So over COVID break, I didn't get to climb outdoors, but I did have a moon board in my garage, and I kind of fell in love with that. And it's just like, there's always something to learn. There's always something that you can get taught by, whether it's, you know, a 10-foot tall piece of plastic in a barn, or a 20 feet tall, gorgeous V16 or 17 in Squamish. So maybe you're falling in love with something better than me, but yeah, that's cool. I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, and I mean, even like like we were talking about the kind of like board lords or whatever. Like, there are some people that are insane on the boards, and I don't. But like, that's like cool. Like, that's like what they got psyched on, right? And I mean, yeah, like, I'll just watch random people because the Kilter app like shows you the like people that the Instagrams of the people that have done it. I'm like, who are these people? Like there are people that's like flashing 13s on the Kilter. I'm like, who is that? And I don't know if like their goal is to climb hard outside eventually, or just like they're really psyched on the Kilter. But that's like, I don't know. Like,
dude, I got to share one thing. Yeah. I found out about Xander yesterday. Xander did, because Xander and I Kilter boarded a lot too in Salt Lake. I didn't post that much, but I was just looking, and I have like over 200 sends above, like V10 and above. But Xander did 22 V12s in a single session once.
Oh my god!
This is like not that long ago. It was like 22 new V12s. Like, he flashed almost all of them too. Like, the kids are just like absurd. Yeah, they kids just get freak on the boards, like,
for sure. Then
also, it was really funny that Xander was saying that like some of them were harder for him than Sleepwalker, and like some of the Kilter board climbs can get really intricate too. Like, I think it's a good board to obsess over. Also, like, it's a little bit more unique in like a lot of more movements than the other boards, in my opinion.
Yeah, but I think like any other board or spray wall, like, it has this kind of unique style. But yeah, I mean, it's been fun to climb on. I don't think I'm ever like, it's funny. It's almost like I don't want to go like too deep on it. Like, I'm like, okay, I can like climb the 12s like consistently now. I don't know if like
go deep.
Like, yeah, I don't need to be like leveling. Jesus. I don't need to do like all the 13s or whatever, you know. Like, I think it's like diminishing returns almost, but like getting like climbing in that style.
I had a
like
similar
really
experience.
Fun.
Yeah. I felt like I also was. Yeah, man, I have the same thought about the board too, where I'm like, it's a great tool, and I don't really want to like pigeonhole myself and become a master of just this one tool, because then I'm not using it as a tool anymore. Man, you have like such good like limiters for like your insights, where you're like, oh man, I just run into this, and it's like, well, maybe this is not so good, and you stop yourself for things at good times, you redirect yourself at good times, you like find those constraints that are perfect for you know, your growth or your progression. Like, yeah, I learned a lot from watching you climb growing up, but also like hearing you reflect on a lot of that stuff right now is super, super fascinating for me as well. Like, you know, it's not easy answers to progressing climbing. It's not necessarily like, you know, here's your little passage to read, and this is what you can follow to get good at climbing. You know, there's a lot of these micro decisions constantly over and over again, and mastering the ability to make these micro decisions, and also analyze like what happens if you do make those or don't make those. And I think that's what I've learned a lot from.
I want to cut in with some. I wish I had like some button to push with like, actually, we did figure out the secret. You can buy it for $9.99 on testpiececlimbing.com. Yeah, we had chatted beforehand, like, Andy, how do you keep getting better? And you're like, I don't know if there's an easy answer. We're like, we know that's the problem. That's what we're always trying to play around with it and kind of get that insight into, how you went from good to great, and every journey is unique, but everyone kind of can often take one little small thing from hearing other people's journey. And so on that note, do maybe you can summarize all of your wisdom and knowledge into a pithy pro tip?
Oh man, I was thinking about the pro tip for a while. This isn't really a tip. I have like a more specific tip too, but I think it's something I was thinking about that relates to kind of what you guys were just talking about. Like, I think people, and this is actually a riff, there's like some quote that's like people overestimate what they can do in like months and underestimate what they can do in like years. I don't even know the context of that or like what it was originally about, but like, I think it's true. It's like, I think most things, even like most like training plans, it's like if you do even like a 3-month long training plan, obviously it depends on the individual. Like, some people might respond really well, and like, especially if you're kind of newer in climbing, but it's like, I wouldn't expect, for me, there's no like 3-month training thing I could do that would like really level me up. Like, I mean, it would obviously help me a little bit, but it's not like I'm going to go to be, I'm going to like every V17 after this like, there's no training plan in the world that could like do that for me, I think.
Except on testpiececlimbing.com. Sorry, go.
Yeah, so
go. Yeah.
It's like, I would expect like the 3-month training, like it could do something for me, but it's not going to like dramatically level me up. But I think that like consistently over the net, like if you do stuff consistently for like 5 years, I think it could, like, even for example, like someone who climbs like V8 right now, like I think going from V8 to like V13 in like 3 to 5 years sounds like totally realistic, if you're like consistently improving. But I do feel like that's probably like talked about less. I mean, it's kind of like an outgrowth of just like our society and like modern technology or whatever. But like, I do think most people wouldn't, like, most people are thinking like more short term. They're like, what's like the trick or whatever, where it's like, if you consistently put in the work for like years, you can definitely, like, anyone who's like, I think anyone who's like, has decent climbing background, is like reasonably fit, could climb like V13 with years of work, right?
I climbed V13 in 5 years. I just found that out.
Well, I would say like
It works.
Yeah, and you're like, I mean, you started as like a really psyched kid, and you're like I would say that's kind of like the outlier in a way. Like, I mean, there are a ton of kids who like start out and just have like super naturally talented and are obsessed and like could get there like way faster. But I think like the average person can for sure get there with just like consistent work. So that's like, it's not really like a pro tip, but I do think people thinking less in terms of like weeks or months or whatever, and more in terms of years, would actually, like, I think they could do a lot more than they think they could. Yeah. Going from like 13 to 15 in like under 5 years is for sure doable. But in like 2 months with a special training plan is like not doable, in my opinion. Dependent, unless you're like, incredibly naturally talented, in which case you probably could just climb V15 right now anyway. So yeah, that's like a kind of macro tip.
I love that one. Yeah, I want to hear the next one. I just want to say that is a really good tip, man. Like that, I just don't want to gloss over it. I think that's something that we communicate on here.
It's just good insight.
Despite my jokes about some training program, and it's really important for people to hear that it takes time. It takes time. Your 90-day training program, it may help, but it's your 900-day training program that will really help.
For sure. And then obviously like a lot of like comp crushers could go outside and like immediate climb 15, but they have also been training for like 10 years to get to that strength level, probably, right? So, but yeah, anyway, my kind of more micro tip is that I think people could do more during their warm-up that would, like, I have been getting more into like off the wall warm-ups, and I've been incorporating a lot of the things that like I might not otherwise, like a lot of like mobility work, for example, as I'm warming up. I actually hangboard a lot when I do my hangboarding like as I warm up. Mostly off the wall warm up. I'll kind of do like a yoga thing, or I'll just do like a bunch of like downward dogs and stuff like that to kind of like get my blood flowing, and then I'll like hangboard and do some kind of like some work on that, and kind of like maybe like lower body mobility or like antagonists like between hangboard sets. And then when I'm actually like ready to get on the wall, like when I've done like a bunch of the stuff that I might otherwise neglect, like antagonists or like mobility or whatever, like even like leg strength, I've been trying to do like some kind of basic like body weight leg exercises when I warm up, because I think that's super important. And then like I feel like when you get on the wall, you're like basically ready to go. And so I think like if you're just starting out climbing, like the kind of mileage you get by warming up or by climbing during warm up is like obviously helpful. But I think at a certain point, it's like me climbing like a V2 and then like a V4 and like two V6s or whatever just to get warm. Like I don't know if it's actually that helpful for me to be climbing like a V0 at this point, just because I'm like dead cold in the gym. So yeah, I think that's something. And I think like a lot of the things that like, I think one, people could get just better warmed up and probably like have better sessions and fewer injuries. And I think they could incorporate a lot of the things that like hangboarding or I don't know, whatever else, like mobility that they might not otherwise do.
That's the big part in the warm up, like pro tip. I feel like the big pro tip there is, I mean, other than what you're talking, the insight about like, yeah, maybe newer climbers get a more effective like volume by doing that in the warm up. That's great, but then once you get to a certain point, you're just warming up, right? Like you're just warming up to do your thing.
Yeah.
But in the process of warming up, you can use that to do things that you probably wouldn't do otherwise. And the balance, you know, what you're talking about before, and like even the questions I was asking about training, or like what attributes you find to be important, you know, like we often won't, you know, like in practice, we often won't, in hindsight practice, we often won't do all of the balance things throughout our sessions, right? Like the session's mostly fun, like it's mostly fun and challenging, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to balance yourself all of the time, unless you specifically pick a training session to practice those things. So in the warm up, Ross is like someone I always point to, has like an amazing warm up. He does, you know, pretty much exactly what you're saying, and he does it for like an hour at least, like every session. And I think, you know, personally, I wouldn't necessarily benefit from that much doing it. I think he really just has a lot of fun doing it, you know, but I definitely try to implement all the things that I probably wouldn't do in the rest of my session in my warm up. It just gets me warm anyway.
Yeah. And I think
good
like
pro tip.
with hangboarding, it's nice because you can, like, I think when you do like 2 max hangs, you're not going to like you shouldn't be like gassed from that. Like you hopefully won't like feel that during your session. But it's like a nice way to warm up. And then, so I feel like I'll do that. And then I'll start at like I'd maybe do like a 9, an 11. And then I feel like I'm warm, but cause I feel like just like, yeah, at this point, like traversing a V0 for 5 minutes, just to like get my blood flowing doesn't feel like it would be like I'm just kind of wasting skin and time, in my opinion, at that point. So yeah, more like, I guess Ross does like off the wall warm up for sure.
All right, you hear that, everyone? Andy's pro tip is warm up on V11. Well, dude, this was great. It was such a pleasure to get to interview you and your sister, and I feel like the next person I need to interview is your parents, because I want to know how I can make it so that my kids go to Stanford, have careers, and climb some of the hardest boulders in the world. So good job to the Lamb family. I don't know what you guys are doing, but there's something there, and I think it's great. You guys are great models for probably really good models for the people who listen to these podcasts, and for me and my kids. Is just, there's a balanced life there. There's a deep love of the sport and of progression and of the actual act of being out there with your buddies. And you've always been a pleasure to climb with. And I've learned a ton, just like Tim, usually in a frustrating way, like Max, where I'm like, why can't I be more like Andy? So thanks for letting me ask you that directly and getting to share it with everyone. So really appreciate it, Andy.
Dude, I gotta shout out your parents. Your parents were always there belaying at almost every competition that I was doing, or what you were doing growing up. And like your dad, I used to make this joke all the time, but I would like make an Instagram story and I would tag your dad or something, be like, "Goat belayer," like, oh my god.
He's like
it was always like
like he'll
That's crazy,
still
man.
go volunteer at the youth comps. Just
That's
funny.
cool.
crazy.
That's
That's
freaking
so
awesome.
cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Well, yeah, thanks for
All right.
having me. It was super fun. And I think it was good for me to like try to think. A lot of these I don't have like perfect answers, obviously. It's good to try to think through. Yeah.
I assume that the next thing we're going to hear is that you've done the room service low and get a good name for Max, and then you will have all the answers, right?
Oof.
So good luck on that, Raj. Please post that video, because that was one of the questions from some of our mutual friends was, I know Andy has the videos of these sends. Why does he freaking post them? But no pressure. But please do post a video of this beautiful boulder, even if you don't send it. And just thanks for sharing, man. I'm looking forward to seeing where this linear progress continues to go. And just thanks again, man.
Sweet. Yeah. Thanks for talking.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about Testpiece climbing, you can check us out at testpiececlimbing.com and even book a session with one of our coaches.